based on learning context. So in the classroom, we have lectures, we have SGDs. What else do you have in a classroom setting? Other groups naman. We're talking about in the classroom setting, what are the things that you do in the classroom? What are the teaching learning strategies that you have in the classroom? Forget about the learning outcomes. Just consider the context. Classroom setting. Leave us a lecture at SGD at the pwede. Yes, please.
Role playing.
Okay, right. The role playing. Cecil? Okay, flip classroom, team-based activities. Anything else? There are many things that you can do, and we can't discuss all of them, but for as long as I know that you have an idea of what they are, then that's fine. Or you might have been doing it already. So the added here, lectures, SGD, of course, if you're in the laboratory, lab experiments, clinical skills center, so pwede may simulation doon, may task-based trainer, okay. And then libraries, computer sites, you go online. What about the clinical context?
Demo, return demo.
In the ward.
Demo, return demo.
Okay, demo, return demo. Bedside teaching. What else can we do? In the ambulatory care center, the ambulatory care, can you teach there? Teaching learning strategy that can be used in the ambulatory care center. Ganun din, diba? Outpatient rotations. And you can have teaching learning strategy of demonstrating clinical competence, registering taking. Okay, what about in the community? We have discussed that there are learning strategies in the community, and then opportunities for patient care are very important. And then you have performance of bedside procedures and simulation. Okay, so in the classroom context, the most predominant method that most of us use is the lecture. Can we do it without the lecture na lang? Okay, because the lecture is the most widely adopted strategy, but is criticized for being more often a passive learning experience with a failure to engage. So what is covered can actually be learned better from reading a book or engaging online, and that's why some of our students don't come to lectures. And it's difficult to follow its delivery, especially if you have a visual overload and everything keeps on moving in the screen. I hate that. Okay, and then content may be inappropriate to the student or the audience. So there are things that you need to consider to make your lecture effective. Okay, so lectures are most widely adopted strategy. They are usually economical and efficient in conveying information to large groups of students. As you see on the slide, that's a surgical amphitheater, okay, in the 1800s, I think. Okay, and you will see that these are medical students in the amphitheater, and then in front is, I don't know if that's a cadaver, I think that's probably a cadaver, and the surgeon or the anatomy instructor might be able to demonstrate certain things that they want to demonstrate. So that's how it looked in the past. So it can provide a good overview into a difficult topic. It can offer different perspectives on a subject, and it can communicate relevant personal, clinical, or laboratory experience. And it can be used for research-based use, where teaching is immersed in a research university. So it can be used to demonstrate in front of the class, as the picture shows. And then it can be made interactive. So what are the tips on making lecturing good? So there are tips, LECTURT. Ito medyo hindi ko alam kung talaga lecture siya. Pero L, learn to keep distracting mannerisms to a minimum. Diba? Even if you don't know it, if your hands are waving all around, people get distracted too. So if you have a distracting mannerism and you keep on moving your hands, you can't help but shake your hands. You just put your hands in the lap, okay, and learn to lecture. And then just put it out only when you need to. Okay, letter E. Ensure that the audience can hear you. So come to the lecture before your lecture and check whether your computers work, whether your Mentimeter works. So that's what we need to learn about technology. They don't always function when you need them the most. Okay, letter C. Consider carefully the use of humor. Sino mahilig mag-crack ng joke sa lecture? It's engaging for the students, but I can never crack the joke. So I don't use it. Okay, but you can use it definitely. Huwag mong piliin kasi alpa. Okay, letter T, try to convey your enthusiasm. Oh, I love watching enthusiastic lectures. And use visual aids that are effective and legible. Hindi kailangan sumayaw-sayaw yung mga figures at humikot sila. Okay, letter R. Remember to pace your lecture. Bad time. But we should really be conscious of time. Okay? And then E, encourage students to actively participate. So how do you do that? So here are some key elements of an interactive lecture. So active student participation. Okay, so you need to have active student participation. So as I did earlier, we asked you to answer, post questions so that the students can interact. And you choose your questions so they'll want to raise their hands. Okay, so you have techniques of brainstorming, okay, group discussions, hands-on experiments. Don't forget to give feedback. Okay. Second is use educational technology. So many of our younger faculty are very good at using educational technology. There are available digital tools and multimedia resources. Okay, interactive presentation slides, but not too much. Okay? So like Mentimeter, Kahoot, yesterday, that was what we used. Quizzes. Okay. So, interactive presentation slides and collaborative learning environment. So, allow opportunity for you to do activities even in the classroom. You pair and share. And then you turn over to your seatmate and you talk about it and then you share that with the next pair, and then eventually that becomes a whole group inside the class buzzing, okay? And then you can have peer-to-peer teaching, and flexibility is key in interactive lectures because it allows educators to adapt to the needs and responses of students in real time. Okay, so there are many diverse teaching methods like storytelling, case studies, problem-solving exercises. So si Kwento ni Rosario ay
Kasi hindi ko alam.
overuse na yan.
Minsan kasi pag hindi mo ginawa.
Okay, but that's really a classic example of how you generate engagement from the students. And then you have to remember always that these lectures and all our teaching learning strategies should have feedback and assessment. Okay, so we have both formative and summative assessments. Okay, the second modality is small groups. Okay, so ilan sa inyo ang nag-PBL? Okay, as a strategy for the school, we have only a few problem-based learning schools yata. Alam ko lang CIM, and West Visayas State was mentioned yesterday. Okay, but many of us use the strategy of having small group discussions, diba? So, ilan sa atin may small group discussions during the medical school? Yes, now. Now, and I expect everybody to have their hands, his or her hands raised, okay? So what are some of the learning outcomes that are achieved by small group discussions? Well, social and interpersonal skills. Okay, but I wonder how many of us actually put that in their assessment. Diba? Pero this is teaching learning, but nevertheless, food for thought. Ginagawa natin yung mga small group discussions, but when we evaluate, like achievement of the outcome with the SGE, nilalagay ba natin sa assessment ng SGE? Okay, so we have to remember that. Then communication skills such as, of course, listening, communicating, teamwork, and collaborative skills. I'll talk a bit later about the fifth classroom and team-based learning. Engagement in problem solving and critical thinking is what is achieved by problem-based learning. Innovative thinking, creativity, and development of new ideas come with fruitful exchange among your peers and between peers and your faculty. Deep learning is emphasized to understand rather than superficial learning, which is which will result only in memory. And then, of course, professionalism is also evaluated in small group discussions, and it provides responsibility for your own learning. So what are the advantages of SGBs? They encourage active learning, provides learners with immediate feedback, and then it is engaging and motivating for our students, especially if they are involved in the process. And it provides a more relaxed atmosphere and is conducive for learning. In fact, studies have shown that if you are looking at the groups that are addressing a particular problem, the results from the poorest group are better than the results of the best individual student working alone. Okay, so there is value to teamwork. What are the problems with small group teaching, however? Maybe it's the faculty. Why the faculty? The faculty is very good at experienced lecturer, but he's not sometimes a good facilitator. And so what happens? They get very bored with observing the students, and eventually, if you finish it earlier, they will conduct a new lecture at the end. Alam ng mga estudyante kung sino gumagawa, no? So, kung type nila yun, they will rather be under that consultant for the small group activity. But that's not the point. The point is that the faculty in a small group discussion is a facilitator of learning. Okay? So sometimes it's more challenging to be a facilitator than it is to be a lecturer. Okay? Diversity provides a variety of opinions. Okay? So that's good, and that's why we enroll students who are from different baccalaureate degrees, legal engineering, humanities, theology, but sometimes conflict arises and groups become dysfunctional. How many of you have been asked by students, "Ma'am, can I transfer block at the start of the year?" And we tell them that they need to learn how to work with different types of people. Okay. Then there might be logistics of providing rooms for your small group discussions. Okay. And we forget that we need to brief and debrief. Okay. We have to explain to the students what the learning outcomes are for each objective, for each SG. So what are some techniques used in small group work? You're familiar with these, no? So brainstorming, snowballing, you mentioned role playing, journal club, tutorials, seminars, problem-based learning, and clinical teaching. So here are some steps on implementing SGT. Starts out with preparation. So there are 9 steps listed here, including selecting the role, taking out your 7 to 8 students from a small group. How many students is your maximum for a small group? In your current school, when you have a small group, how many is small? So ideal is 7 to 8. Okay. So more than that, more than 8 is already big. Okay, siguro papayag na tayo hanggang 10. But even then, it's difficult to grade 10 students, di ba? Nag-grade ka ng 10 students, hindi ka na lang mag-grade ng iba-iba. Sabihin na pass lahat. So that's why we have grade inflation. Because faculty grade the students pare-pareho. No? So napupull up ng yung mga magagaling na estudyante, yung buong grupo. Okay, pero pwede rin mangyari mag-pull down lahat ng estudyante sa isang group. Okay. And then, so aside from preparation, during the SGD, so what should you remember about during the SGD? Of course, you should start out with an introduction to each other, and then state your goals for the session. You review your learning outcomes, you establish the ground rules for working as a group, and create a positive atmosphere that is conducive to student learning. So remember that some of you will be very conscious of the task. No? So that's good because that person can remind you. Sometimes what's nice about the group work is you can actually have a mock grouping, no? And then see, and then we used to, when we taught group work, we will be given roles. Okay, ikaw si silent flower, or ikaw si magdada ng dada, or ikaw yung magda-dominate ng session, and then process that information, and that becomes, in other words, it's how you teach proper group work. Then you recognize the different roles that each participant plays, and then you debrief, you summarize the session, and then you plan your assignments or your plans for the next meeting, and what are the deliverables for your next meeting. And then after an SGD, kapalalabas ng goal, gagawin mo, i-rate mo yung estudyante. So you need to support follow-up actions that are agreed upon during the meeting. You plan future SGTs as necessary. You complete the students' attendance and evaluation sheets, and you evaluate the SGT session. I often end my SGT sessions with, what did you learn from this session? And that provides feedback already to the students. Okay, so let me talk a bit about some strategies specific. So this is the flipped classroom. How many of you are familiar with the flipped classroom? Oh, good. So you don't need this session? Okay, so the flipped classroom, so what you see on the figure over there would be the before, okay? Then in class, and then out of class. So the class is flipped because the first pass at the information about the topic is not the second one in the class, okay? Instead, the first pass is before, it's the assignment. Okay, so what are the goals of a flipped classroom? It's to make the classroom a more interactive learning environment. So this is one of the strategies. It enables students to learn at their own pace, correct misconceptions through immediate feedback, and organize new knowledge that they can use in the future. So it helps the instructor tailor the course to individual student needs. So the key elements are as follows. An opportunity for students to gain first exposure prior to class. It's an incentive for students to prepare for the class. What do I notice? If we give work, I mean, contrary to some of you who say the students don't read, there are diligent students who actually do their homework. Now, like Cecil here and Wilson, who did the homework for today. Okay, so who do their homework and read ahead of time. And what happens is when it is required reading, when we come back for a synchronous Q&A, there's more discussion because more people are prepared to question the faculty. Okay? So it provides a mechanism to assess student understanding and in-class activities that can focus now on higher level cognitive activities. Because you already gave them the material that they could process, that you feel borderline students can process beforehand, so that when they come in, they can already see the level of understanding of your students. Okay, so there are several types of flipped classroom structures. No? Yung iba ay iba-iba ng pangalan, pero pare-parehong elemento, no? So the some can have an inverted classroom. Of course, you're familiar with case-based learning, guided inquiry learning, team-based learning is actually an example of a flipped classroom, discussion-based learning, demonstration-based learning, full flipped classroom, false flipped classroom, and the virtual flipped classroom. Okay, so what are the benefits? So students learn more deeply and at their own pace. So they learn for understanding, not for memorizing. The flipped classroom learning is customized and engaging, and students are active participants in the learning process. And if you record your video and store them where the students can go back and review, that helps students review for exams. The interaction increases and students learn from each other. And both the students and the instructors get more feedback. And if you do interview with students, they feel that in fifth classrooms are more satisfying and they perform. So when will you use it? Okay, you can use it to enable teachers to act more as guides rather than instructors. It can maximize the time that teachers have available for each student in the classroom. Kasi nabawasan yung introductory to the topic. But it may disadvantage those without access and use of technology. Okay, so here are some steps to prepare for a flipped class. Okay, preparing the teacher. Spend more time preparing content in in-class activities. In other words, you have to plan for that ahead of time. You plan to experiment and iterate and engage. You may want to engage teaching assistants if you realize that students will not be able to learn it as a whole group, and you would like assistance in having these modules. And then you find a champion in IT. Kung gagawin mo yun. Okay, steps in flipping a class. Identify where the flipped classroom model makes the most sense for your course. So hindi lahat ng course bagay ito. As Melchior said, you will choose the topic where the students can understand. And that's one concept 1 to 3. Concept 4, 5, 6 is something that has to be synchronous. So you've already lessened the time that would have been spent if you tackled 1, 2, and 3. If the students did their assignments for the field.
Kalamansi pala ito.
So what concepts or topics do students struggle the most to understand based on exam scores and or assignment grades would be a consideration for the classroom. And on what topics do students benefit from the opportunity to apply concepts under you as their guide, and as your resource person, and as their teacher who provides information. So step 2, spend class time engaging students in application activities with feedback. So you have to figure out how much of your class time could be repurposed in ways that will provide students with an appropriate level of challenge while leveraging your expertise as a guide or coach or teacher. Okay, and then number 3, clarify connections between inside and outside of classroom. So if your students have read, I'm sure that they will be more actively participating. Okay, and then if there are misconceptions that are raised, the teacher can correct those misconceptions during the class session. Number 4, adapt your materials for students to acquire course content in preparation of class. So you have to identify what activity they will do before the class. It could be a reading assignment, watching a video, or listening to a podcast. But make sure you hold the students accountable for completing the assignment. So if you want to hold them accountable, you must put it as part of your assessment. The assessment drives learning. Okay, and make sure that you provide students a way to pose questions about the content they're learning outside of class. I don't know how effective you are in encouraging students to participate in discussions within the learning management system, what do you call it? You ask them to respond to your posts. And then there are learning management systems have that. Okay, and number 5, extend learning beyond the class to individual and collaborative learnings. So they siguro look for an opportunity where the students can learn the steps and learn the process in another situation that they will have later on in the semester. Okay, and extend learning beyond class to individual collaborative practice. Okay, and then preparing the students. Spend a class session setting the expectations. Okay, again, they cannot be sent there and say, okay, wala ka na, magpasa ka na lang. Structure their learning, okay? And let students know what they stand to gain. And emphasize student responsibility for coming to class. Okay? Is that all we have to prepare for? Well, preparing the institution. Tell your administrators that your students are doing better. Your grades in the licensure exam are going to be higher if they're providing what you need to give them, classrooms for that, additional manpower, okay? And then you have to address attendance concerns and offer to pilot the pedagogy through a part-time. So you don't have to flip the whole curriculum. So you can try and see what works for you. Okay, so this is again what I showed you earlier, the flipped classroom. So the students participate in class activities, and then come in together in class where they practice applying key concepts and receive feedback from faculty. And then students can check their understanding and extend their learning for later similar, let's say it's a patient who has similar problems. Okay. So whatever the type of flipped classroom that we use, remember I showed you there are more than 10 types of flipped classrooms. While every flipped classroom is a little bit different, the goal is always the same. So what's the goal of the flipped classroom? Interactive, student-centered learning. So that's important. It's interactive and it is student-centered. It's not teacher-centered. Okay, now let's talk about team-based learning. So how many of you use team-based learning? Team-based learning? Okay. So there are some schools that use team-based learning, not here, but I think Nanyang University, TechU from Singapore, their base is team-based learning. If you know Red Mendoza, so siya yung pasimuno ng team-based learning. Okay, so it's a structured form of small group learning that emphasizes student preparation out of class and application of knowledge in class. So the students prepare, so as like a flipped classroom, by reading prior to class. Then they are organized into teams of 5 to 7 students that work together throughout the class and be motivated. So ito yung structure. So before class, ito pareho lang sa flipped classroom, ito lang yung drawing. So before class, there's time for readings, for preparation. Then in class, during the 1 to 1.5 hours, there is an individual test in the first part of the session. So after that, you submit the test, get your scores, and then process the same test completed as a team. Okay, and then you decide what is the correct answer among yourselves. Okay, if there are questions, you can share why you answered one over the other. So for those who know the answer and correctly, you expect them to be able to convince all the rest that they know the answer. But when we tried this before, there were some students who got it right in the individual test, but they got pulled down because somebody else was more convincing than them the right answer. So what's important about the team, there's teamwork, and then they get a grade also for that session. So there's a team grade, And then that is added on to the individual grade, and that forms the grade for that section. Okay, so I tried this in class on urinary tract infection. So we've been doing that, and we now have another set of team-based learning for, we have combined glomerulonephritis, renal failure syndromes. So that helps, I feel that it would help them define and decide the differences when they are presented with hematuria or proteinuria. So that's another session that we now use for team-based learning. And then, of course, in that process, the student is allowed to appeal and say, no, my answer is correct and your key is wrong. Okay, so that is okay. In fact, that's what they are encouraged. And then at the end, the faculty may conduct a mini lecture to explain what concepts are not very clear to them and wrap up the session. Okay? So here in team-based learning, again, the teacher is a guide to facilitate learning. The learners should encounter, or best to encounter inconsistencies so that they can argue between preconceptions and new experience to provide a basis for developing new understanding. So it focuses on relevant problems that are accompanied by group interaction, and it promotes learning. And learning requires research. Okay, so here's a picture of our, this is pre-pandemic fun. So the first picture is there taking the quiz, okay? And then you have, at the bottom on the left, we had cards at the time. We would just give multiple choice questions. And then you have here the facilitator who is providing explanations for the class. Okay? So what are the benefits? Here are some published in literature. Better performance in the MBNE, psychiatry subject test, attitudes about working in teams and team learning activities is considered more effective learning strategy for students. Higher mean scores on questions that assess knowledge of content learned by team-based learning versus other methods. And the TBL approaches are more effective for difficult concepts in pharmacology. I do not understand why that study showed that TBL was not more effective this year concepts. Okay, but that's the study that was published in. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, now we'll talk about clinical teaching strategies. So I guess all of you have taught at bedside. Or pag basic science ba, hindi na kayo nag-bedside? Are you a pure basic science teacher? Yeah, there are some pure basic science teachers. Others, some will retain. Yeah. So how many of you do bedside teaching? Marami pa din. So teaching and learning is focused on and usually directly involves patients and their families. So it has been stated that since clinical practice involves diagnosis and management of problems in patients, the teaching of clinical medicine should be carried out on real patients with real practice. So we're talking about not relying on simulation for the entire thing. The students, our students, need the patient exposure. So this is the learning triad in the clinical teaching. So the triad consists of the patient, the student, and the teacher. So what are the knowledge and skills that are learned in clinical teaching? Of course, you can see all these competencies, the competencies of a basic physician, obtaining a history, performing a PD, generating a diagnosis, formulating a management plan, using clinical reasoning, and communicating effectively, both with the teacher at bedside and with the patient and the patient's watchers. Okay? You also learn professional behavior by indirectly by watching your consultant deal with the patients. Okay, you can help demonstrate empathy. You can perform diagnostic and therapeutic procedures at the bedside and acquire knowledge about medical instrumentation. Okay, what are the strengths? Of course, it's the focus on real problems. Pipili ka ba ng online? Pipili ka ba ng synchronous group learning over the ability of having to touch the patient, see the patient, communicate with the patient? I was surprised that some of our students were not happy about shifting back to face-to-face learning. I thought they were also excited. Not everybody was so excited. They had gotten used to not having bedside teaching. Okay, so the relevance improves student motivation and active participation. That's the expectation. And it is a good opportunity for us as teachers to model professional thinking, behavior, and attitudes. And it humanizes care by involving the patient. The patients feel activated and part of learning. So even if you think that it's a bother to the patients, not all patients think that way. Especially if they are blind, okay, they actually feel very privileged because the consultant has seen them and the consultant has made the diagnosis. Okay? So what are some of the other strengths? Better clinical teaching is associated with better student examination performance. We have to realize that the clinical environment is the only setting in which skills of history taking, PE, clinical reasoning, decision-making, empathy, and professionalism can be taught and learned as an integrated whole. That's why providing patients or students with extensive exposure to the clinics to provide experiential learning is very important. Okay, so what are some of the challenges? However, you can think about, well, maganda ba yung bedside teaching sa inyo? Diba? Bakit hindi? Hindi. So some of the challenges are time pressure and constraints. It takes time to be able to do a good bedside teaching. Constraints would be research, kailangan to research. Sa mga ibang lugar na kailangan i-input yung EMR, electronic medical records, na i-issue yun. Okay. So competing work demands, often opportunistic. You don't go through the same program experience, di ba? Iba-iba yung dumadating na pasyente sa wards. So that's why it's difficult. Increasing the number of students, it means that either you need to have more faculty or you need more resources. Fewer patients, mas madali sila ma-discharge. Mahirap na maghanap ng estudyante for preceptorial. And then it's often under-resourced. There are multiple levels of learners, and the clinical environment may not be teacher-friendly. There is insecurity about admitting errors in front of the patient. Okay, so please remind ourselves that if there are problems, we will tackle those problems outside the exposure. And there's rewards and recognition for teachers are good. Do you agree with that? Do you think you should receive more rewards?
Yes.
Yes. Are your deans here? Sila si Dean Arcadio, marami kami rewards. Thanks to Dr. Arcadio. Sige. Okay, what are the problems ba with clinical teaching? Hindi klaro yung objectives and expectations. How many of you bother to check anong level ang i-bedside ko ngayon? Level 6 ba? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so sometimes our couple don't even know what students will be present during their next encounter. Okay, and then there's a tendency to focus on factual recall rather than developing reasoning skills and problem solving skills. So let's remember that teaching may not be appropriate for the student's level. Diba, frustrating naman sa faculty kung hindi niya and she prepared very well when in fact what the students need was just, teach me how to do a history, teach me how to do a physical examination. Kaya inaral ng faculty ay yung up-to-date management, up-to-date research about the patient. Okay, so teaching, passive observation rather than active participation of the learners. You call attention to your students when they're apparently not listening. Inadequate supervision and provision of feedback and little opportunity for reflection and discussion. And sometimes there's a lack of respect for privacy and dignity of patients. And a lack of congruence or continuity with the rest of the world. Okay, so I'll just discuss two models of clinical teaching, the 1-minute receptor and the snaps. Are you familiar with that? 1-minute receptor or the snaps model. Okay, so these are strategies for improving clinical teaching. Okay, so what are the strategies for improvement? You have to plan the teaching, set a good example, make sure you involve the student, observe the student, provide a good, conducive learning environment, and focus on clinical problem solving. And then make sure that you provide feedback to the patient after every encounter has new learning or reinforced learning. So what does planning of teaching involve? So draw your own objectives for the session, know your learners, the number, the level, know the duration of the session, and coordinate with other tutors. Ideally, if there's a group of you who are managing bedside sectorials, you should have meetings and you set expectations that are common. Second is setting a good example. So then demonstrate concern for patients' feelings. Allow the students to observe you perform a physical examination. Be mindful of avoiding shortcuts. So the shortcuts will be for upper level. For undergraduate students, usually really good. Demonstrate professional behavior beside your patients and your students. And then experienced attending physicians have demonstrated that they are able to focus discussions on perhaps social determinants of care, psychosocial aspects of care, and the use of simple questions and a willingness to expose their own analysis from both the patient and so the senior consultants here have good insight. Manners. Okay. And really want to teach. I think the idea is these learner-wise teachers are really the clinician educators that we all need. Next is involve the student. So make the student participate actively in the session. You can have common goals. Is it history taking today? Physical examination of the chest tomorrow. Okay? And my deliverable is in 4 weeks. Case presentation and then discussion. So involve the student, allow them to do independent learning. Maybe you can after bedside rounds, you can have a clinical question. The student can look up the latest literature. So attending teaching ratings peak when students are high. Okay. So observe the student. How do you observe the student? You observe the student, you want to see how they take the history, perform PT, and explain to the patient. Okay, so here are some models of bedside teaching. So do you stand at the head of the patient, at the foot of the patient, or beside the patient? If you're a demonstrator, the clinical tutor demonstrates the aspects of the case history and healing to the patients and students. So you're a demonstrator of how the correct process is to do. Okay? If you're in the tutor model here, you stand to the side and critique each student as they inquire into aspects of the history and carry out aspects of teaching. If you're an observer, you stand at the foot of the bed, a little distant, so that you can see the interaction between the student and the other students and the patient. So you need to provide a good teaching environment. You adopt a friendly and helpful manner. Show the student that you understand their fears. You need to be a facilitator of learning. You stimulate interest by making class fun. Okay? Encourage reflection and provide challenges. Very important is this last slide on positive constructive feedback if there are so the predictors of overall high quality teaching include giving mini lectures or inpatient topics. So sabi pa rin ng mga estudyante, kahit short sessions with the preceptor, teaching ECG and chest X-ray interpretation. They enjoy that. Providing feedback on case presentation. If your preceptor is at bedside, receiving high quality feedback and proposing exam. Okay, and then the last tip here is concentrate on clinical problem solving. Okay, how many of you use problem lists? What are the patient's problems? And then use the patient problems to search for factual information and trigger discussions. Okay? Use probing questions. Huwag yung sagot na kailangan ng yes or no. Kung sagot ng how, why. Okay? And then compare and contrast the cases. And challenge students to satisfactorily explain each patient complaint or problem and each abnormal PE finding to support his or her diagnosis. Okay? So I just have two clinical teaching models. One is the 1-minute preceptor. It is a model of bedside teaching that allows the physician to perform his role as a clinical preceptor. Basically, it goes through the whole clinical preceptorial process. There are 5 micro skills clinical teaching. So in a typical preceptorial, how much time is spent in presenting the case? 10% is used for asking questions, and the remaining 25% is used for case discussion. So in the case presentation, in the 1-minute preceptor, you have 5 micro skills. The first is you get a commitment. Get a commitment from the student. And then get a commitment meaning what's the history, what's the PD, and what's the commit to your diagnosis. Then you probe for supporting evidence. You teach general rules, reinforce what was right, and incorrect mistakes. So una, diagnosis ng patient, so 50% is number 1 dun sa file. So diagnosing the patient allows the student to present the case based on history taking and physical examination. So in that time, when the student is presenting, you're giving the consultant the opportunity to think about the case. Okay? And diagnose the patient based on what the student says. So the task is mapped out here. So diagnose the patient in the first part. Then the second part, the physician is diagnosing the learning. When the physician asks her, what is your diagnosis? What is the basis for your diagnosis? And then the physician probes for underlying reasons. Always why? Okay. What's the basis of the differential diagnosis? And in the third part, this is where the faculty member, bedside preceptorial physician, teaches general, provides positive feedback, and corrects the errors or misconceptions. So during the case presentation phase, the clinician formulates a diagnosis. So again, diagnose the patient, based on what the student says, correcting also at the time, diagnosing the learner, getting diagnosis and differential diagnosis, and reasons for the diagnosis. And the third is teaching general tools, providing feedback and correcting.
Yeah, there is a basic question.
So SNAP's model is the second model. It is very similar to the 1 minute receptoria. It has 6 minor skills. Okay. So in the SNAP's model, the focus actually is the learner. So the learner role is to discuss also, like the first 1 minute receptor, the patient encountering facts, verbalizes his or her clinical reasoning. But it is the learner who asks questions. It is the learner who identifies what he has seen as his problems, what he can answer, and discusses that with the consultant. And the learner then engages in follow-up learning that's pertinent to the educational encounter. So what is the preceptor's role? It's the preceptor's role to stimulate repetitive thinking. So probing questions. Empowers the learner to have an active role in the education and serves as a knowledge presenter rather than a knowledge source. So the preceptor takes on the role of a facilitator. Okay? So the SNAP, so here is again another acronym. F stands for summarize briefly the history and findings. So similar yan sa first class and second micro scale of the 1 minute receptor. Then N is narrow the differential to 2 or 3 relevant possibilities. And then A is analyze the differential by comparing and contrasting the differential diagnosis. P is probing the preceptor by asking questions and uncertainties, difficulties, or alternative approaches. So that's the student's time to ask the teacher. And then the second P is to plan the management for the patient's medical issues. And S is to select a case-related issue for self-directed. Okay, so when the patients, I will skip this now. This just gives you an example of summarizing the differential. So let me skip that. Okay, so Cox has described a plan of 2 linked cycles to maximize students' learning from each patient. So we have here the experience cycle and the explanation cycle. So it just goes through this cycle of preparation, where you involve student preparation and briefing to ensure that they are aware of what they are going to see and the opportunities available for learning. This is then followed by clinical experience of interacting with patients, history taking, weekly discussion of illness and planning. And then you have, that is your clinical encounter. And then after that you have the, so that finishes the first cycle. And then you go to the explanation cycle, where you reflect on your experience. After you have reflected on that experience, then you explicate and explain and try to think also of what you have seen before that you might be able to use for this particular session before you go to the next cycle. So this is the Cox model, and every next it's like the PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, and then do another cycle of plan, do, check. So to summarize, here are tips to improve clinical teaching. So first, in preparation, remember that it is the key element to conducting effective rounds and increasing teacher comfort and fluency. The second is planning. You can decide to control the bedside encounter by setting limits. By saying, today we will focus on history taking. Next session will be planning. So you can structure that together with yourself. And then you have interaction. Okay, you role model a physician-patient interaction. Then observation, step out of the limelight. Okay, and keen observation is a necessary part of learner-centered bedside teaching. Huwag ka na yung mga gusto mong magpakita sa mga estudyante na magaling ka magaling ka sa history taking and peak skills, yun ang makakakita mo sa estudyante. And then instruction, challenge the learners' minds without humiliation, augmented by gentle correction when necessary. Do the teaching. Okay. So me, I raise my eyebrows, or I enlarge my eyes that's my cue that we're doing something wrong. Okay, and then summarize. Tell learners what they have to do. Then always have time for the briefing. Need time for questions, clarifications, assigning further briefings. If you read the receptor and you find out that the student has a patient that's right, maybe you can help to extract the student. Okay? So feedback, find out what went well and what did not. Think about the bedside encounter with the reflect, evaluate what went well and what went badly, and what you should do better next time. And you go back to that cycle, magsimula ko din sa bagong preparation for the next stage. Okay? And then my last part of this is just one slide of simulation. My first take-home message on simulation. You're familiar with simulation, right? Okay, use simulators selectively. Paying attention to cost effectiveness. Hindi ka bibili ng high-fidelity simulator. Kaya ang papatulong lang sa kanila ay insertion of an ID. Diba? Sayang yung ginastos mo para sa high-fidelity simulator. So make sure that it is used properly. And many important procedures for beginners may be learned using simple, inexpensive mannequins. So meron mga class trainers din. So meaning you can buy an arm, you can buy a pelvis, insertion of a Foley catheter. So those are called class trainers. Maybe that's what you need at this level of the learning. Yung mga high fidelity, yung mga newer gadgets, para sa mga matatandang mga specialista. Ibig sabihin, mga veteran na sa kanilang practice at they want to keep up with the newer gadgets or the newer therapies, the newer robotic surgery. So experts may need the high-cost cutting edge, but not for medical students. And the briefing is a key element in simulation-based education, as it is a key element in all of our teaching learning activities. And teachers should gain expertise in the briefing. So commonly ginagamit yung mga high fidelity for CPR, for OR series maybe where we will discuss emergencies. Okay? So in summary, we have talked about factors that affect the choice of teaching learning strategy. Remember your alignment with CLOs, PLOs, the learning setting, the type of curriculum, maybe the type of students. I also reviewed uses in improvement of lectures and SGPs and introduced you to the flipped classroom fee-based learning as alternative teaching learning strategies. So we emphasize the importance of clinical or bedside cheating. History exam, physical exam, clinical reasoning, decision making, empathy, professionalism can be taught and learned as an integrated approach. And effective clinical teaching must be planned and practiced. I've shown you also the 1-minute preceptor and the SNAPS model, which provide opportunities for enriching the clinical experience as effective teaching, learning, and science. So simulation will become an integral part of the medical curriculum, but should be used positively. So a quote from Osler, 1914, to study the phenomenon of disease without books is to sail an uncharted sea. But to study books without patience is not to go to sea. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Corley. The floor is now open for some questions. I'm sure some of you will have some questions to Corley.
Sinend ko ito sa COM. Isend ko na.
So, two things about the lecture. Actually, about two things about preparation, also about the value of the lecture and because I don't know if it's with all the other institutions, but I think a lot of the faculty members, syempre, we need to be compensated for that. But sometimes, I don't know, in some institutions, the lecture is higher, mas mataas yung compensation niya compared to sa ibang teaching learning activities. Or the structure-wise, parang the load, parang for example, iba yung compensation sa lecture, tapos iba yung compensation sa lab. Pero in fact, yung mentioned earlier, ma'am, that sometimes it can be harder in the laboratory because it's more you need to facilitate the information to really check if they learn. But I don't know, maybe it was also in the context of preparing the institution. Because sometimes, I think one of the mentioned earlier that wanted to do like the activity of like preparing a recorded lecture and then during the exposed time is going to do the question and answer portion. But maybe part of it also is a factor in preparation of the institution to prepare them that this is actually a valid form of teaching strategy. And plus, I have a feeling that it is lesson that some institutions are stuck in the lecture lab paradigm of teaching. So sometimes, or sometimes, for example, for institutions that have a monthly time for attendance, parang you need to fill up the time assigned to you, like the 8 hours, to be fully compensated in order for you to, not to get that, but actually you already delivered what you actually were supposed to get because of the teaching strategy that you initiated. But they need you to be there, 3 to 6, for example, or to fill the actual time where in fact you already delivered what you when you set out. That's one part. So parang I don't think parang dapat for me the lecture and the lab should have like a same value because it's a teaching strategy, but the institutional policies are really limiting that. And this is also part of the motivation for the faculty because we exerting so much effort and then it's not the value is not you're not being valued. So I didn't see that. Sorry, and then the next question was the preparation. Because we're also preparing, preparing kasi is a very important part of it. You're not just the teaching part, but in many institutions, I don't know, maybe this is my perception, that you're being compensated only for the teaching part, but not the preparation part. Because you deliver it. So parang maybe that's also part of preparing the institution. Like preparing is also a work and should be compensated well. Instead of rather than just the actual delivery of the teaching.
So that's correct. So, but because there's you have to change the paradigm. So we've argued with our university that small group discussions should hold the same weight as lecture in terms of at least that was a step. Kasi before, small group discussions is also
Kaya sila hindi ko
But sa amin, they have already considered the hours to study. So, it's a matter of talking it over with the consideration. There are rules.
Ano?
Ano pag ibang ano na isa lang?
Hindi, yung daylight lecture. Tapos after like smoke, tapos experiment.
Tapos yung exam sila rin
Because of the HR rules and parang applicable pa rin yung
So, kailangan mo yung faculty yung
Sila, para kasi
Okay, thank you. One more question. Yes, Dr. Contreras.
Good morning, ma'am. I just want to get the feeling of the room. Kasi we have, Ched has prescribed part of the memo is the 20% attendance in activities, so in the class. We are discussing several innovations already about the participation of the students, etc. How do you feel about requiring or checking the attendance of students? Do you require it? Parang kasi ang feeling ko, adult learning naman ko. And these are postgraduate already. Di ba hindi na tayo parang high school or but it's always, hindi mo na hard and fast, so that's not to get the feeling of that.
Well, let's get a feeling. How many of you raise your
May
hand?
grade tayo.
If ano gusto mo,
5%.
Yung ano ma'am, kung do you require attendance? Yeah, students.
So, talking about students, how many of you have a required student attendance for every course? Okay, attendance. Student attendance rule sa course. Pare-pareho ba?
20% naman.
20%. How many have it at
100%.
20%? You require your students to have at least 80% attendance. Diba? That's the other way of looking at it. Your maximum amount of absence should not exceed 20%.
Thank you.
And it's a common
5 minutes.
institutional
Bigyan ko
rule.
ng quiz. Yun ang ating
umalis.
So you can argue that with your faculty union.
So, hindi
Any more questions?
Sila na yun.
kasi yung grade natin sa atin, hindi lang attendance slash interaction.
Ano lang
Hindi sila nagtatanong eh. So yung quiz
good morning. Wala akong pananahiyan.
pag-absent sila doon, di
Yung mga question about attendance, para sa akin, we need to require students to really come to the class. Bakit? Even though they're adults, meron tayong natuturo through our experience na hindi nila makukuha sa
Nakausap ko
textbook.
siya.
Opo.
So that's very important.
Sila
So,
na.
kaya
They
para
will
sa
start
akin,
in,
they have to come at least
they
80%
will start
of the days
November.
during the
Wow.
semester, siguro semestral or yearly, pag 1 year ang
Approve na. Baka sobra silang,
Ha?
baka sobra
Hindi
silang.
ako, no? I don't
Doc,
think,
yung amin, Doc, parang approve po lahat except yung instructional design.
oh, ba't hindi kayo maapon na mabuhay?
Physically present. The teachers are supposed to
Sa
be
amin, 10 years.
Ha?
But I
10 years. As in 10, 11, 12.
Saan yan?
Sa mother, Manila Theologian.
Experience nila.
Yung malapit sa iyo.
With others.
Yung ano yung religion ninyo?
As they go to different
Yung Korean, no?
Missionary.
Korean.
Parang rite of passage.
10 years kami binibinisa.
Kailan sila doon kailan sila nabigyan ng
Ano?
PTO?
Ang
Permit to operate?
Sino?
Kailan sila nabigyan?
Actually, once
Kailan
lang.
po?
Ay, ito lang year. Tapos sabi ko, kasi nakatabi ko siya yung during ano.
Doc, tanong mo naman, anong feedback ng faculty?
Ah,
Kasi
wala,
maraming
wala,
mag-quit.
Hindi ko na, hindi, ang tinanong Tinanong ko lang, kahit ang bilis din nyo.
Ano sabi nila?
Wala, in-approve kami. So itong November, they will start.
Baka
Sa Sultan Kudarat. Bakit?
I-research ko nga, bakit siya mabilis?
Ano?
I-research ko bakit mabilis. Amin kasi 10 years eh.
Pero sabi ko, napaka-unfair kayo.
Okay lang, Dok. Yung iba 10 times ko. Okay lang.
May special.
Baka dahil mo sa Muslim area. Pero hindi rin. Hindi kasi right now ako, although sa Chinese, meron akong tinutulungan sa Cabardo. They will also open a school. Ang nasa isip ko lang, baka alam mo yung bar area yun eh, Muslim. Siguro baka alam mo yung gusto nila. Pero unfair. Hindi, I'm not, Kaya, pag halimbawa, pag na-visit yung Cotabato at pinahirap pa, i-check.
Because it's almost time. So thank you for Makati.
Baka gusto lang.
So, first year of the program, actually on time naman, we go now to the workshop
Yung mga doctors
which is a continuation
Kasi
of yesterday's activity. So it's the same group, the same groupings, and now we will work on the content and the
Group.
teaching
Ikaw, dito ka na rin.
Now it's going
Mag-isa
to
lang
be
siya.
birthday lunch.
Talagang na-reserve.
Oo nga, Dok. Thank you, Dok.
So you join your group and then talk about it and then why you join the
Hindi,
lunch.
yun na rin kasi ngayon, instructional design na rin. Yun na rin. Oo.